Okay, so the first thing I wanted to say was your mileage may vary, and this is related, I guess, to what I said earlier also about maybe if you also have had this experience before and you find that some of the things I say today actually were not true to you, or you feel differently about it, because everything that I'm sharing today is my experience and my thoughts based on my experience, my background, and my context. And if you have a different background, different context, you might uh, have a different experience or different thoughts about it. So just take what helps you and don't limit yourself to what I share about, and figure out what works for you. Yeah. So part one is about being the founding designer. So I want to clarify that when I say founding designer, I'm not a founder of a company. I was an early stage employee, and not the founder of the company. I was an early stage employee and the first designer, official designer in my team. So that's what I mean by founding designer. When I joined, I was a fresh grad. I was fresh out of university, and therefore I had no full-time working experience before. I had no experience working in the design industry because I also, in fact, my education-wise was in computing. It wasn't in design. So I don't have any formal training in that area, uh, and no working experience in that area either. So besides that, at the point that I joined, the size of the company was 4 people, including 2 founders. And around the time that I joined, there were a few other hires as well. So I would say approximately about 10 people soon after I joined. So that was the kind of environment that I was in. So what was it like for me at that point of time being an early stage employee and the first of a role? And if you were to step into such a position, what may be some of the things that you would expect? First things is being willing to do many things. So I also come across this as like wearing many hats. In terms of design, that means being a design generalist, not a specialist, and even beyond design work, you probably have to chip in to do a lot of other things. So for myself, because I had a background in computing, I was doing front-end development, some amount of front-end development for quite a long time, like for a few years at least. And I was doing testing, I was doing copy editing, I was I was doing like things that needed to be done around. And even beyond like work, you have to help out around the office a lot. So at that point of time, we didn't have grocery delivery, or it wasn't common. So sometimes you actually go to the supermarket and like buy stuff from our pantries, and we had a duty roster. So every week, a few different people would be in charge of cleaning, wiping the tables, picking up the trash, sweeping the floor, and mopping the floor. So there are all these things that you may not think about, but it is probably something that happens at a lot of early stage companies. Number two is being able to be a independent worker and learner, because if you are the only one in the role, there's no one else uh, telling you what to do, really, like the details of what to do. No one really to guide you. So you have to be able to learn on your own, and be able to prioritize on your own, make judgment calls on your own, and so on. Thirdly, in a small company and a very early company, likelihood is that there are very few processes in place, and a lot of things are actually done just by speaking directly with each other back and forth. For example, at that point of time when I first joined, there was no ticket tracking system, no bug reporting system, no requirement documentation. Nobody was writing design briefs and giving it to me. So so if you're someone who needs a lot of structure and thrives in a lot of structure, this probably doesn't match that well. And I want to also make a last note on the fact that being the first in a role gives you the opportunity to set certain foundations. So, for example, design foundation, design styles for your product, how your product works, like basic user flows, basic mental models maybe, and even the types of tools and processes that you will start setting up for yourself. The likelihood is that as the team grows, if you're still there and you start bringing people in, is that they will adopt the things that you've already done or the ways of working that you've already set up. Of course, it can be changed, but the likelihood is that it's easier to already to use something that's already there. And it's an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility because you're affecting what your product or your team may be like in the years to come. So what kind of struggles did I have? What kind of challenges did I have? The most immediate challenge that I felt was keeping up with the engineering team. Because at some point, I kept feeling that I couldn't keep up and they were just waiting for me to pass them more mockups, more screens to develop. But actually, besides that, even though that was like the immediate challenge, besides that, there was actually a deeper problem of not having anyone else to learn from or to bounce ideas off, because being the only designer, there were no other designers that I could ask about in the team who understood the context of what I was doing or trying to do. And as somebody, as I said earlier, who didn't have a background in design, was very new, it was especially hard because I was trying to learn at the same time and I didn't know, I really didn't know what to do. So I think the obvious question is, how did I overcome these challenges? And to be honest, until we actually started to hire more designers, I don't think there's any solution. So it's the truth that I was very stressed, I was very demoralized at certain points, and that was just the way it was. I really couldn't do much about it. I kept lobbying to management to say, let's hire more designers. And I just tried to learn by reading on my own, doing stuff. And in terms of like keeping up, I just had to do what I could do and not do what I couldn't do. There's really nothing else that can be done, I think. And so it sounds like maybe I'm saying the solution is simply just have to hire more. And to some degree, that's true. But that doesn't mean that even if you hire more, it's the perfect solution, because you may be solving certain problems, but you introduce new problems, which I'll talk a bit more about later. So it's a trade-off, and I think that's important to understand that pretty much everything is a trade-off. Yeah, so getting into part 2 about scaling the team. So as I said, I was lobbying to hire more designers. And when we were finally ready to look into hiring more designers, then I would say this is where things got more interesting. I'm going to cover a few topics that I thought of that I think is important, but if you have more areas that you're interested in, because definitely what I'm saying is not exhaustive, do post them in the Q&A or anywhere else. Yeah, one thing I want to mention before I cover the topic is that once again, like the context of my company, we are not funded. We have never really been funded, and no VC backing or something like that. So we don't have that kind of investment backing for aggressive growth, which I know some companies they do. So the way that we have grown is very gradual, and the team is still very small. Right now, the team is and I say team meaning the design team, is 6 people, including myself. And at its largest, there's only 7. So I can't really speak for those like super rapid growth kind of situations, or like suddenly you have distributed teams kind of thing. Okay, so hiring. When you build the team, what do you start with? So this was a question that came up when Jill very kindly was asking on the design Slack channel about what kind of topics people would be interested to hear about. And so I thought I'll include this. When you build a team, what do you start with? When we started hiring, I honestly wasn't really thinking much about this. All I wanted was to not be the only designer. So I would say the natural gravitation was to hire people who could do more or less the same kind of responsibilities that I had been doing. So we ended up with a team of generalists, I would say. Each of them has their individual strengths, but in general, they are generalists. Last year, we hired our first specialist position, which is a graphic designer, because we realized that we were getting more and more work coming in from the marketing team, and we wanted to remove the responsibility of doing graphic design work from the product designers so that they could focus on product design. But that's what happened for us. But if you want to think about what you should do, I would say to ask yourself, what kind of skills does your company need now, and what are you ready to have? Because everyone's situation is different. I would say think of it like a design problem in the sense that you're designing your team. And what I mean by this is to understand what problems you are trying to solve before throwing solutions at it. Because I think team structure, hiring is one of the areas where quite a lot is written about from different teams, and you might read articles about how other teams are structured. You might attend talks like this and see, oh, they structured the team in a certain way, but that doesn't mean you must do the same thing, because just because it works for them in their situation doesn't mean that it's the best solution for you in the conditions that you are in. So of course you can get ideas. It's a good practice, I think, to get ideas, but definitely evaluate them before implementing. So some of the questions to think about, I would say what I mentioned just now. Why are you hiring? What kind of problems are you trying to solve? What does your company need? Are you trying to spread out your workload? Are you trying to duplicate the kind of functions that you're doing? Are you trying to break it down to specializations so that each person can go deeper into a certain area? Are you trying to hire more juniors, more seniors because of the type of work that you have available? Or what are the reasons? Then consider what kind of resources do you have and what are your constraints, especially in terms of budgeting, headcount. You might have an ideal outcome that you want where you hire like 5 different specialist positions, but you only have budget to hire 2. So which are the most important? Which should you prioritize? Or in terms of budgeting also, maybe you have enough to hire 1 senior designer, but technically you could maybe get 2 junior designers. So which one suits your team better now? In terms of other resources like time and ability to train, I would say, do you have that time and the ability to train someone else who's coming in? If you don't, and it's still like super fast paced, you're still struggling to keep up, then maybe it's not a good idea to hire someone who is looking for a lot of training, or someone too junior who expects a lot of training. I'm not saying don't hire juniors, because obviously they can, some of them can handle themselves on their own, but if it's someone who expects a lot of training, then and you don't have the ability or you don't have the time to do it, maybe it's not the best time to hire this person. And of course, there's tons of other factors, I'm sure. But one other word of caution that I want to say is beware of hiring too hastily. Because I think especially if you're in this situation where you want to hire because you feel overloaded, or you feel desperate for for more people, for someone to take over part of your role. If you're coming from a place of desperation, there is the risk that you ignore certain red flags, perhaps during the hiring process, and just want to fill the position as fast as possible. And if you end up with someone who is a bad fit, it's not only not positive, it can have a negative effect on the rest of the team. So it's something I would say be very careful about. Try to temper that desperation, I would say. All right, next topic is management. If the team grows, at a certain point of time when the team gets to a certain size, some sort of management needs to be put in place. And this this manager may or may not be you. If you started out as the only designer and you're in that sense you're an IC, an individual contributor, then going into management will require a whole different skill set, I would say. And if you want to go into management, the question is, do you have those different skills? Not only do you have those skills, but does your manager believe that you have those skills? Because even if you believe you have those skills, but you haven't demonstrated them in any way or your manager doesn't see it, it doesn't make sense for them to want to promote you either. So it may be that case where you want to go into management, but it may be another case where you didn't think about it at all, and which is my experience. When I was working as the only designer, I was happily working as an IC, and I wasn't expecting that if the team grows larger, I might have to step into leadership or step into management. But there is a certain advantage beyond the parts about the skills. There is a certain advantage of you having been there longer, having understood how the team works so far. Perhaps you have already established good working relationships with all your peers and your managers. And if you do have those potential for those management skills, then you may be asked to step up and lead. So it could be, either one of the situations. And I just ultimately put down, like, consider that you may be asked to step up and lead, but at the same time, don't feel that you're entitled to it just because you were the first one there. Okay, I will go through a few practical matters. It's just a short list of things that I think you should prepare if you're starting to scale. But I won't go into details about each of them because I think you can probably find out a lot more about this elsewhere. And this talk will get too long. So number one, have a hiring and interview process. Number two, have an onboarding process for your new hires. Teach them about your tools, your processes, your company, your product, and ramp them up into the design work that they'll be doing. And also have ready your systems for collaboration. So that includes things like design system, file system, tools access, administration, standardized workflows. Excuse me. In terms of design system, that's like a whole topic of its own, and I don't mean for it to sound very intimidating. If you don't have like the whole code side of it set up, I mean, even if you just have Figma components or sketch symbols or something, that's already a good start. In terms of tools, as if you're the only designer, you might have been using personal accounts, single accounts, and if the team grows, you may have to get team collaboration workspaces, which may cost money. So I mean, just things to keep in mind. And as you set up these things, I would recommend documenting these lists and processes as you go along, because documentation gives people somewhere to refer back to when they forget, and it's reusable for each new hire and therefore scalable. As you build on these documentation, it can become like a handbook. All right, sharing knowledge and delegation. So an advantage of working alone is having all the knowledge in your head. But once there's more than one person, the knowledge needs to be shared. And sometimes being able to deconstruct and organize knowledge in a transferable manner can actually be more difficult or more challenging than simply retaining the knowledge for yourself. So I think that was an interesting point that I learned. Sometimes I think you might find yourself thinking, especially when requests come in unexpectedly, you might find yourself thinking, okay, it's faster and easier to do it myself than to have to explain to somebody else how to do it. So let me just do it. But this is bad for scalability and it's bad for building up knowledge in the team. And obviously, if you keep doing everything yourself and not teaching others to do it, you're going to overload yourself also. So it's important to learn how to share knowledge, learn how to deconstruct and organize that knowledge in a way that you can share it with others, and delegate work, start delegating work, which is necessary if you want to scale successfully. And I will also say that being able to share knowledge, to teach others, is actually a very good way of learning yourself and kind of like testing how well you actually understand the topic. Other trade-off. More people would require more coordination and require more systems. So even though a larger team would be expected to work to produce more faster, it might not be as fast as you expect it to be because there will be more communication and management overhead required. And I read this article some time ago. It's called Spotify Failed Squad Goals. I put a link here, so if you get a slides later, you can always read it yourself if you're interested. I mean, it's not directly relevant. It's about Spotify's team structure or what they wanted their team structure to be. Anyway, in the article, I came across this quote that I thought was really stood out to me, something that I identified with. It is about specialization. So if as you scale your team, you have more specialization in your team. What it says is every responsibility a team sees to increase its focus becomes a new cross-team dependency. So I think that this also refers back to the coordination and communication that is needed, the additional communication and coordination that is needed. Because a lot of times when we think about specialization, we're like, oh yes, now I no longer need to do that part of the job anymore, and then we're going to get faster and better. But the information needs to be passed along. So, and if you recall what I said earlier about knowledge sharing being not as straightforward as you might think, then all this additional communication, right, introduces room for error. So in order to do all this coordination and communication better, you will probably need more systems and more processes. And this is another area, just like hiring. I think that it is quite common to read a lot about how other people do stuff, how other companies, their systems that they use, their processes, their structures, and it's another area, therefore, that I would say, be careful and evaluate for yourself what will work for you. So don't jump into just implementing systems in a certain way because that's the way some of the famous companies out there operate. Maybe their team is like a my screen says my internet connection is unstable. Do let me know if I drop off. Okay.
You're good so far, Rose.
Going back to it. All right, great. Where was I at? Yeah, so some of these other companies, very famous ones, they might be very large. They might be in different countries. They have multiple products, and they need a lot more coordination. Maybe your team is like my team, which is like 6 people, and with just one office. So do you really need that level of complexity that they have? Maybe not. So do find the right balance for your company, for your team. Don't overcomplicate things too early, because it will be very overwhelming for your team if it's overly complicated, and honestly a waste of time. So find the right balance. And even when you've implemented something once, the team will continue to evolve, and the way that you work will continue to evolve. So it's not a once-off kind of activity. You have to constantly evaluate and adjust as time goes by. I want to make another note about shaping culture. I think this is very important to take note of, but unfortunately in this area, I don't think I really know a lot. I don't know all the answers. I just wanted to mention it because I think it's important to keep in mind. Uh, if you want the culture of your team to be a certain way, I believe it needs to be shaped and maintained consciously, rather than just hoping that your team will be all great and fine. I think it's something that you do have to constantly be monitoring. Be willing to step in when you see something that is you don't think it should be the way it's done, certain behavior that you don't think is ideal. You will have to step in and do something about it, say something about it. Otherwise, you're basically uh, condoning certain culture that you don't want to have. And of course, the the other side is also true in the sense that if you see things that are good, representative of the type of culture that you want to have, then do commend it and so on. So consciously remember about these things. One more slide. Yes. All right. Last thing I wanted to mention today is about mindset shifts and change management. So I've been talking about like a lot of new things that you have to do, and this is something important to take note of is about change management, managing all these changes. So as the company grows larger, it will in a sense mature and mindsets change about certain things. For my company, I have noticed that the company itself now expects more compared to when I joined the company. The company now expects more of our hires. That means we expect our hires to come in with higher levels of skills, higher level of professionalism, and in turn, the employees also expect more of the company, expecting the company to have streamlined processes, training, standardized HR, career progression, and so on. It's not something that I expected when I joined. So expectations change and mindsets will change. So another example is earlier on I mentioned that as an early stage employee, you have to be willing to do many things and not draw boundaries on your job scope because there's so few people and you have to kind of chip in to help everywhere. But as the team grows and you hire more people for specialized roles, you do have to start drawing the scope around like each person's role. And the likelihood is that each person's responsibilities will deepen but narrow. So you have to be aware of that and learn how to deal with the specialization. If you keep doing the same things that you were doing before, even though you hired a specialized role to do it, then the team is not going to learn how to deal with specialization, and it doesn't make sense for the new hire. And for those people who grow with the company, like myself, because of all these changes, not only does everything around you change, but you need to change yourself also. You need to change your own. I had to recondition myself also to change my expectations, the way I think about certain things. For example, because when I joined, there was no onboarding for me. I mean, practically no onboarding for me. No ramping up in that sense, like I'll start you on some small project first and then let you understand how things work. It was just like, go in and just rebuild the system. Yeah. So because I had that experience, it took me some time to realize that I couldn't just throw the new designers into the deep end. I like myself, it was better to actually ramp them up slowly. Sometimes I also still find myself thinking things like, I never had help when I started. Why do I need to help? Why do I need to provide guidance now? Why can't they figure it out by themselves? But obviously, that's not the right way to think about it. And if we do have the ability to provide more guidance now, it's definitely something that we should do. And I mean, if I had guidance at the point of time when I joined, I would have been probably a lot happier also. So I mean, if we do have the ability to do it, we should do it now instead of saying that we do everything the same way as before. So it's something that I had to, condition myself also to change my own expectation. Yeah. So as everything changes, besides you changing, you also have to bring the other people in the team along with you. So for example, if you are introducing a new system, um, people on the team who are used to the previous way of working may be slow to adjust, or some of them might actually be resistant to it. So you have to be able to manage change and to do it in a measured way. I think if you push too hard, too fast, it can backfire. So deal with change management delicately and try to understand everyone's thoughts and emotions about it rather than just forcing something. And I want to also mention that I think this match in expectation is something that should be considered as a factor when hiring as well. So besides looking at hard skills, soft skills, values, and so on, I would say see if the candidate have the match in expectations of where your company is at. So for example, if your company is very small, very young, and the candidate is someone who wants like a Google kind of atmosphere, right? Then that's a mismatch. Or if your company is growing larger, but you have a candidate who has a very like scrappy kind of like don't bog me down with processes kind of mindset, then that's also a mismatch. And uh, if you have this mismatch, there can be a lot of friction. It's nothing like it doesn't mean that the person is not a good designer or not good at their job, but um, because they expect certain things of the company or the company expects certain things of them that doesn't match, there will be a lot of clash. So I would say consider this as well. And um, as time passes, the team changes and all that, it is possible for people who had a match at a certain time to either outgrow a team or the team outgrows that person, and it's completely possible. And this also could lead to people leaving, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing because I would say if it reaches a point where it's a mismatch and nothing can be done about the mismatch anymore, then uh, yeah, maybe that is the best solution. Okay, so that's more or less the end of my talk, but I just wanted to give a general sum up, right? In terms of being the first designer in my team, I think I got the opportunity to do and to learn many things that I would probably not have been able to do or to learn elsewhere. So I am very grateful for that. I think in terms of being the only designer or the first designer, I would suggest that if you don't feel comfortable working very independently, or you don't feel comfortable working with a more maybe like chaotic environment, a more rough and ambiguous environment, then maybe you won't enjoy this kind of experience that much. In terms of scaling, um, as your team grows, the way that you work, the way of working within the team will change. And all this adaptation and adjusting of the team structure and processes is not just a matter of logistics, but more importantly, people, how they think, how they feel, and of course, very importantly also, that includes you, how you think and feel. So uh, think of it, remember that it's about people more than just logistics. When deciding to set up structures or systems or anything, don't just follow blindly. I think I mentioned this a couple of times, but try to understand why certain things may or may not work for your team. Don't, and lastly, don't force change. I would say the best way would be to build positive relationships and bring people along with you rather than forcing change on others. Yeah, so I think that's the summary of what I wanted to share today. Thanks. everyone for listening, and I am going to go to the Q&A now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rose, for that sharing and bringing us through your whole journey as like the first designer all the way to like leading a team. But you are definitely not off the hook, because there are a whole bunch of questions for you on Pigeonhole, as you know. So kicking things off, I think Shirin is going to take over the screen share, and she's going to cast the questions here so that we all can see it. But let me just read out the first one. So the first question.
Stop sharing.
I think Shane can take over, right? Shane? Oh yeah, maybe you can stop sharing then.
Yeah, Rose, I think you need to stop so that everyone will see just one.
Cool. There we go. Okay, so the first question here is, how would you assess whether a startup is a good one to join as a first designer? And like, what are some specific criteria you would think of?
Wow, I don't know if I can answer this question. Honestly, I'm going to say first, right, disclaimer. I feel that I may not be good at answering a lot of questions. But how will you assess whether a startup is a good one to join as a first designer? I will say for my own situation first, why did I join this startup? There was no good reason. Honestly, I wanted a job and I got this job. So I wasn't going through like a very careful like evaluation. Something that so what happened to me was that I was introduced to this company by one of my my friends in school who had done an internship with them. One of the things I remember that he said that I felt was a good thing and made me have a positive impression was that he said that they are able to make money. They're actually making money. I mean, it may differ for a lot of different people, because I know that there's a lot of big, I don't even know whether they're considered startups anymore, that are running on like VC funding. And it's not necessarily like it's bad. So
Yeah.
So different people obviously will have different kind of criteria. For me, I like that the company that I'm working for is stable enough to make its own money. I feel some sense of security in that. But whether a startup is good one to join as a first designer, honestly, I really have not spoken to a lot of startups in different kinds of environments. But as a first designer, I am very lucky. I would say I think that not I think I know that in my company, even though I was the first official designer, before I joined the company, my boss was one of the founders, was the one actually doing the design, and he has always believed in the importance of design. So it wasn't something that I had to fight for. And if you are very new to it and you think that there's a lot of challenges that you have to deal with, that may be something that you want to consider, in the sense of, do you have to fight for that role on top of everything else that you're doing? I mean, if that's a challenge that you like, that's great. But if not, if the founders are people who don't really know much about design, and then you can tell that you have to really fight for it, then I know that happens to a lot of people. But in terms of, if you're there as a first designer, that's, I guess, a criteria to consider for yourself. Like, is that something that you're in for, or is that something that you find too much on top of your plate? In terms of being able to make money, I wouldn't say it's so much of like, can the company make money, but I would say, like, how much do you identify with the product? How much do you think you like the product? I think that's important also. You'll be spending a lot of time on it. So if you don't buy into the product, it will be much less enjoyable. Yeah. I guess.
I was just going to say, I think I agree that like having a
Yeah.
solid business model would be a good thing to look out for. I think that's pretty important. You were saying about culture.
I think culture is something that, it's a very generic sounding term, but it's true. I think if you go for the interview and you see certain red flags, like the behaviors of people, I mean, it may not be your interviewer, it may not be the founders, like anyone else there, take note of it. It's not necessarily like make or break, but just be aware of what does it seem like, what does the environment seem like there, do people seem to get along with each other, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think for startups that becomes more important in particular, because I think for smaller teams, you get like a kind of a smaller community that can have a stronger culture, you know what I mean? Versus like if
Yes.
you're in a
Yeah.
big company, it's like so many different people, so many different kinds of personalities. But in startups, I think you really can follow very closely, like maybe the culture of the founders or the culture of the
Like the
few. Yeah.
the impact of each person's like personality on the team is quite strong.
Exactly.
And yeah, and I mean, I also mentioned earlier that you don't have a lot of processes and a lot of things are done by just talking to each other. So that comes into play also. Yeah.
Yeah, those are some great points. Thanks for that, Rose. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So the second question here is, what were the factors you think someone should consider before deciding to accept? Maybe the first part of this question is somewhat similar. What are the factors you think someone should consider before deciding to accept a founding designer role? But also, what do you think would make someone a poor fit for a founding designer role?
I think some of the things I mentioned earlier, if you don't feel comfortable being alone in the role, like you like to have other people to bounce ideas off, you like to have someone to guide you, maybe in terms of deciding to accept being a founding designer. I know I joined as a fresh grad, but if you don't feel confident doing that, maybe you don't want to consider if you have a choice. Yeah. If you're someone who, like I mentioned earlier, so you are very used to, or you like a very structured kind of environment, like everything goes through Jira, I won't do it until I see in Jira kind of thing, then and that's just one example, but it could be anything else. Yeah, I think those things are things you should probably consider. I don't know what else. What would make a poor fit? Yeah, someone who's not able to work by themselves. Yeah, I would say that.
Okay, so the next question here is, as a founding designer, often we don't know what we don't know. Sometimes we might have to outsource our knowledge. So how do you work in those times when you really don't know what you're doing? It's a good question.
I will say, right, there's a difference there. Okay, firstly, in any role that you are, whether it's a founding designer or not, there are times when you don't know what you don't know. And actually, that's different from the second part of the question, because if you don't know that you don't know it, then there's no way that you're going to be trying to work around it, right? So actually, the second part of the question is asking about things that you know that you don't know. Sorry, I'm a very grammatical person. So, yeah, how do you work around those times when you really don't know what you're doing? Honestly, I guess it depends on your style of learning. For me, I like to read a lot of articles. I don't really like to talk to people very much because I'm an introvert. So I've never been someone who's like very active in the community. But if you are, right, you're comfortable doing that, I think that's a way that could be useful for you. If you attend this kind of community events, or you know other people in the community, just have like one-on-one talks with them, actually might be more useful. I find it more useful than one-on-one talks with people. And then you can ask them about, like, what did you face, and even if they don't have answers, like even if I don't have answers today, I think that kind of knowledge where like other people have struggled through the same situation is quite comforting. At least it helps to lessen the stress a bit, even if you don't have a solution. Yeah, so I like to read articles and stuff. Recently, actually, I say recently, like a few months ago, I actually asked Shane about something, and she gave me some resources. So, if you have people that you can ask, that that's helpful. Find If you can find support within your company, I think that's really good too. Whether it's your own manager, you talk to them and say, like, I'm really struggling in this area, or like peers in your company, if you have other roles in your company, maybe they might be facing the same kind of thing, and then you can try and brainstorm together, work together. Yeah, I guess it's my suggestion.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. How do you manage product decisions made by founders that aren't necessarily derived from user inputs, because often they will have the most say.
I feel like this question is really relevant to me. Honestly, it happens a lot. It still happens for us because my team, admittedly, is not very strong in research right now. So, oh yeah, Jill said I could plug, right? Plug for my team if I wanted to. So, if you're a researcher and you want to join, I'm not too sure about the priority in hiring right now. I will say that in terms of hiring right now, we are prioritizing, I think, development roles. So if you know anyone also, you can recommend development roles and QA. But I mean, personally, I would like researchers on my team. Yeah. From founding unnecessary research, direct inputs on interviews because they have often the most. It's very true. I mean, first thing I want to say is to validate this. It's very true. They have the most say. How do you
In the
manage?
team that Shun and I were in together, we used to call it the HIPPO, the highest
Oh
paid
yeah,
person's opinion.
I've heard
HIPPO.
that. Yes. Yeah. Honestly, I tend to go along with it. Maybe it's not the thing you want to hear, but I guess it also depends on how much you trust and you believe that things that they say are also coming from a user perspective. I would say even though it's true for my team, like um, the founders or higher up have the most say. I do believe that they're trying to say at least that from their point of view, it is they feel that they're speaking for the best of the users. So I mean, it may or may not be true in the end if you go and do research and find out, but at least I know that the intention is from that direction. Maybe in a different situation, the intention may not be, you may not believe that the intention is from that direction. Yeah, I guess if it's really something that you feel strongly against, if it's something that you actually align with, then it's really not an issue because you're like, yeah, definitely, I think I should do that too. But I guess in the case of like, it doesn't align with what you think that should be the right way, then, I mean, how good are your working relationship? How much can you push back? And I say that, I say the working relationship part because how much you can push back is really, I think, to some extent dependent on your own working relationship with them. How much you have demonstrated from your work that you can make good decisions too, and you can make good decisions from user input. And if you haven't demonstrated them, then you don't really have much backing to kind of push back. If you have demonstrated that more, then you have more like a better place to stand to push back. And even if the pushing back doesn't succeed like all the time, maybe slowly it does have an impact. I don't know. I don't really know.
I wanted to add, I do think that one thing that can help is to like try to build up that credibility for yourself, as you were mentioning, where it's like whether if there's, which is unfortunate, but if say you just joined a new team and then there's like a lot of disagreements between you and someone who's much higher up than you, one thing that you can honestly do is just go along with it, but then try to implement tracking or try to get feedback and follow up to kind of validate whether your perspective was even right, because maybe your perspective was wrong, or and if your perspective was correct and their perspective was wrong, you can kind of use that to tactfully and gently present it as an example.
I think that part is very important. Tactfully and gently is very, very important. I think, especially when we get frustrated, there's a tendency to kind of push back in a very what's the word, antagonistic way, like we are adversaries, kind of thing. But if you approach the conversations from a much more collaborative way, and you make sure that you really actually make the effort to understand what they're saying and see where they understand where they're coming from, right? Then it reflects a lot better on you. Like you're not just pushing back for the sake of pushing back, and the relationship you're building gets better, and then they are more willing to trust you in the future. Otherwise, if you start off and you keep going in a way that's always against them, I mean, why would they want to be with you? Why would they want to trust you? Why would they want to support you? It doesn't make sense. Yeah, so definitely that kind of tact and approach is important.
I just saw Nicholas's comment. Wish my hippo was in this event. You can, well, if we upload this, you can send them a link. Anyway, okay, so I think we have time for one more question before we have to wrap up because we are running out of time. And there are so many, but I think after this, Rose can take a look and you all can reach out directly as well. But okay, so the last question is, what is an effective workflow as you grow a team to function better compared to working individually?
Effective workflow to grow team to function better compared to working individually. Once again, I don't really know how to answer this question. I think some of the things I mentioned earlier about making sure that you have the kinds of tools and processes kind of documented down is useful, very useful. So making sure that everyone's using the same tool and using it in the same way. Like, oh, if you have a file system to have your shared documents, right, then make sure that everyone is organizing it in the same way. Otherwise, what's the point of having a shared system when everyone is going to throw the files into every different place, and then when you actually need to look for something, you can't find it? Or effective way to workflow to grow team. I mean, in terms of not just a design team, but involving development. When we first started, like I said, we weren't doing any ticket tracking or anything. Then along the way, we started using Kanban. Along the way, we started using Jira. Then we started using Jira like more properly. So, I mean, if whatever works for you, you really have to think about what are the things that you need to coordinate, and then figure out like what are the tools available to help you coordinate those things, and then pick the best of your team. So we started out with Kanban because at that point of time we felt like Jira was too much, was too complicated. So we started out with Kanban, we started out with Trello. But then over time we had to get more complicated and then started using Jira and all that kind of stuff. For a team to function better compared to working with individually. In terms of design, when I was one person, there was no such thing as like a design critique because I'm supposed to critique myself, but along the way then we started having design critiques. So as a team, that's the advantage that you have other people and give each other feedback. So that was something that we implemented in compared to working individually. Yeah,
I'm gonna add on
please add on.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that like to your point of like, I think sometimes you can overcomplicate things and like it is important to find the right process for the stage at which your team is at. And even if that means like evolving your tool as your team grows, I think that that's totally fine. And I think some of the best teams that I've worked in are very open to people's feedback of like, is this effective for you? You know, back to your point of like, you just need to find what works for your team and what works for you. I think the best teams will ask, like, you just need to ask your team, like, is this working for you? Is this effective? I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?
Even when we started doing design critiques, we evolved like based on feedback. At first, we were doing like once a week, and it got very long because everyone was sharing, and then it would take forever. And then someone suggested, hey, why don't we split it up to 2 different days? We were like, yeah, okay. So we split it up to 2 different days, and then yeah, I mean things change, and if you have a team culture like like you said that you can just make suggestions and introduce, say, hey, I've been using this tool, I think it's really good. Like yeah, that's been happening recently with one of my designers who's in this talk. Yes. I think she has been quite enthusiastic about certain new tools and keep sharing them. Yes. So I think when we first started, I was using Adobe Illustrator to do design work, which is I know considered very backward. But then I think sometime after she joined, she also started saying like, why don't we use Sketch? And then I did some evaluation of it. They were like, okay, yeah, let's change to Sketch. And then recently last year, right? It's like so much hype about Figma and then everything. And then once I finally had the time to evaluate, because quite a long time I didn't have the time to evaluate it properly. Then like last month, December, we switched to Figma. So we are still in a transition. But yeah, I mean it's totally possible to change tools as you go along. And I mean in this case it's not really a case of like becoming bigger and more complicated tools, but that's also possible. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, shout out to all the great managers out there who really listen to their teams, including Shuyun and Mike, who's in this call. But yeah, okay, so I think we reached the end of the Q&A, unfortunately, even though there's some really good questions down here that
Questions.
I know, there's some really good ones.
Let's see if like I can give like one-line answers to some things.
Okay. Do you want to like do like a last?
Let me just scan. Let me just
Yeah,
scan.
a last scan. Okay, you scan a bit.
Yeah. Let me do a last scan. It's
Like
becoming
it's
mentioned sort of inevitability.
yeah.
Inevitability. It's not inevitability. I can't pronounce inevitability. It's not. Is there space for you to still be an IC? I mean, technically yes. Although it really depends once again on your situation. So for me, I wasn't really given a lot of choice to be honest. But in other cases, it might be the other way around actually. You might not be given a choice to not be an IC. I mean, so it really depends. There's no like one answer to that. Design part of engineering. Kind of yes. I used to actually join the stand up every day as part of the stand up. So would I be a founding designer again? Very difficult question to answer because like I said, I'm very happy for the opportunity, but honestly, like I said also, my choice was just to have a job. How do you train the graphic to product but have no experience at all? Yeah, I probably won't answer that. Maybe someone with graphic design experience will actually be better. Were you alone in my effort? Or how did your organization support or not support you? Honestly, it's not that my boss was against the idea of hiring more designers, but you know, like I said, we're not funded, that was kind of stuff. There's always priorities, which roles get more priority first and so on. So yeah, it's not necessarily I was alone, but it takes time. It takes time. How do you consider join a young team over more established design team? Oh, great question. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know, and we do have most of the designers that we hired had a couple years experience, but not like super senior either. I'm the only designer. How do I convince management that we need more designers? Yeah, I mean it's a challenge depending on your environment. Do you does your team believe in design and so on? If they do, maybe you know they don't need that much convincing. If they don't, then you have a harder battle to fight. I'm trying to get more non-designers involved. Oh, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to skip questions. I don't know. What do you look out for when you're finding your team members? Simply skills, characteristics. Definitely skills important. But beyond that, definitely like ability to work together, things like that. The ways of thinking. So skills wise, I really try to think about like, do they know how to solve problems or like explain decisions? Yeah. How do you keep yourself motivated and see things on a fresh perspective? A great question. It's sometimes quite challenging. For me, because I moved into management and it's like a whole different set of challenges. There's definitely always things to learn, but yeah, but it's challenging. What makes a manager do you handle design work? Yes, I still do handle design work, but less. How will I delegate work to my teammates based on their interests, their strengths, and their availability? Yes. Do you have any tips or management as a design hire? Build good relationships. That's the most important thing. How does management expectation of the design team result? Can't think of an answer right now. What kind of support do you seek for management quality? How do you maintain a healthy culture? How physically for other countries? Remote is definitely more challenging. Right now we're all remote, but we actually do have one we have two fully remote people. I don't think I have answer for that. So what are some of the things that we're going to look at to change the vision for executive mode? I don't have anything formal. Probably just talking to people and asking them. How to build a good relationship with stakeholders? I don't know. Just be. This is something I said before. I think not today, but just in general. Seek to understand. Really try to make an effort to understand where they're coming from. Yeah. Look at it from a collaborative point, right? Don't look at it as like I'm here to battle against them. It's never effective to do that. Design team. Me, I guess. Yeah, pretty much me. Yeah. Okay, that's all.
That was like speed round Q&A. Thanks for taking the time to look through all that, Rose. And yes, we have reached the end of the session. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us and who participated with your questions and your votes. And we're really looking forward to seeing you all again in our next meetup. So have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much, Rose, again.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Back to work time.